You know, they're selling y'all wolf tickets, people. You're eating them right up.
Hey, pussy, are you still there?
I back. Trust me, I back.
But I'm not impressed by your performance.
You'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Shut your fucking mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do fucking nothing. Now, what is you do nothing?
I'll tell you what, bro. You know, I was out there. I was fighting all the hitters, bro. You ain't fought no hitters.
Come on, guys. It's normal.
I'm not saying I would fight you. I would kill you.
John, do you think? John, do you think I'm just gonna sit there and let you kill me, John? I mean, really?
No, don't be scared, homie.
I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody. The double champ does what the fuck he wants.
I'm gonna beat you into the living death. I mean, maybe that's your job, but where I come from, you know, people like that get slapped.
That's fucking illegal.
Nick Diaz, you just shook up the world. How's that feel?
Hey, I'm not surprised, motherfuckers.
Yeah, this is a simulated death match. And you haven't simulated anybody's death yet.
I said it last year. We're not here just to take part. We're here to take over.
What is the game plan going in against him?
The game plan is you go in there, hit him with some good shit, don't get hit, and come home with a pocket full of cash.
Who the fuck is that guy?
Everybody's on steroids. The whole UFC, everybody.
I'm gonna go home tonight. I'm gonna drink a Coors Light. That's a Coors Light because Bud Light won't pay me nothing.
Do you want to be a fighter? That is my question.
Any of you radio personalities think you want smoke? Call me Mr. Chimney. I want smoke.
Yes. What is up, MCR family? Another daily edition of the show live on YouTube, obviously podcast from iTunes, Spotify, Radio, etc. I am Matt, the Hipster Hunter, obviously. Joined today, hopefully we do this more going forward, Ant, and maybe make this like either a weekly or bi-weekly thing where you jump on MCR, because obviously I love having you on. I have to admit, as I have gone more in depth with my boxing coverage on the channel, I feel like I've watched less and less MMA, so it's nice to have someone on that is more and more hardcore MMA than I am in today's age. So glad to have you on, Anthony. Of course, Anthony Walker from ShareDog.com, good friend of the show, is on. Of course, we have Fugatti as well, but you guys know Fugatti. Who cares? And what's up, man? Obviously, we're going to be talking UFC 238 and a slew of things. Call in 323-870-4051. Press 1 to get in the queue. Digressing. Ant, how you doing, man?
I'm pretty good, man. How you guys doing, man? It's good to be back.
It's good, man. It's good. It's another day, another dollar, of course. Joined, as I said, by Fugatti. Fu, how you doing, man?
Yo, doing good. It's nice to have Ant on and you, and I'll just be here for the comedic relief because, I'm a mad casual. But then 238 was great, though. I'm excited to talk about it and all the other news.
Yes. Like I said, call in 323-870-4051. Press 1 to get in the queue. International callers, Skype, Mixed Combat Radio on Skype. Let's get into UFC 238 because we do have a lot of topics to get into because we have not done an MMA show in some time. So we do sort of a backlog of topics to dive into. But let's get to the UFC pay-per-view that happened this weekend. Henry Cejudo defeating Marlon Moraes for the vacant bantamweight belt since TJ Dillashaw tested positive for EPO. Obviously, Valentina Shevchenko put on a spectacular performance and perhaps KO of the year performance against Jessica Ai, plus a litany of other fights. You know, the Donald Cerrone sort of Ai fiasco, to speak of Ai, and so much more on this card. And really, honestly, a deep card. We could spend an entire show talking about each of these fights. We won't be able to, unfortunately. But we're going to talk about some of our favorite fights from the card. Of course, starting from the top, Cejudo beating Marlon Moraes. And really just after a rough first round where I got a little bit worried about Cejudo's ability to get in on the inside and be effective, he was able to sort of just rush through and bulldoze Marlon Moraes in the preceding rounds. And it was really impressive stuff from Cejudo, not only from his toughness and durability factor, but on top of that, his combination punching was just on point. His accuracy, his power was incredible. Anthony, your thoughts on the main event of this pay-per-view? Cejudo really putting on a performance in the second and preceding rounds from that first rough round with Moraes. Your thoughts on performance?
It's just so much to take away from this fight. I mean, the first round played out exactly the way I thought the entire fight was going to play out. I expected Moraes to be on the outside, to use his kicking game to kind of keep Cejudo at bay, and Cejudo to have trouble closing that distance. And then especially for him to attempt to be the aggressor and get denied, because, of course, with his Olympic caliber wrestling, that you'd expect him to want to get on the inside and kind of crowd those kicks. But to see him endure such a brutal first round, and then for Moraes to be able to, for Cejudo to then be able to make those adjustments and like really slight adjustments too, that made all the difference. And the fight just seemed like it was from another event. It seemed like we saw one fight in the first round and then an entirely different pairing come rounds 2 and 3. So I was floored by it, because then the conventional thought of Moraes beating Cejudo was based on his kickboxing acumen. That seemed to be the conventional wisdom. That's what you'd look at on paper and say, hey, this is where he has a clear advantage. But for Henry Cejudo to defeat him in a primarily striking contest is nuts. Like he deserves all sorts of credit for what he did Saturday night.
Absolutely agree. Fu, your thoughts on the main event and Henry Cejudo's performance against Marlon Moraes?
I think the biggest shock was that Moraes just couldn't defend the Muay Thai clinch at all. I mean, there were times where he got like kneed like 4 times straight, just flush, knees. And I thought he's a much better fighter than that. I don't know if he was just extremely exhausted or if Cejudo's just that strong. I have no clue. I guess we'll see, as like, obviously that's the number one guy at the weight. So what is Cejudo going to do to those other guys? And I mean, I was kind of wondering, is there even any incentive for him to go back down and defend, his other belt? Who knows? But it's crazy. That first round, I thought Moraes is just going to walk through him because he was so active and Cejudo had no answers.
And on top of that, he was his level of control when it came to the range of the fight was just so dominant in that first round. And Cejudo just looked lost. Like, he literally looked like a short guy coming up in weight that didn't belong there in that first round. And like Anthony said, a completely different fight in that second and third round. Obviously, Cejudo has now made the claim, and shout out to Cejudo for being one of simultaneously the cringiest and corniest fighters out there, but like the most endearing as well. For going out there saying like he's triple C now, and not champ. He's triple C, obviously Olympic champion and champ status in the UFC, and making a claim for pound #1 status. Anthony, is his claim valid? And on top of that, is his claim as being the best combat sports athlete of all time valid? Your thoughts on that?
I say yes and yes. I mean, as far as the pound for pound claims, now, while most of us will still rank John Jones as #1, most of us would probably still rank Daniel Cormier at #2. So there was actually some debate amongst the Sherdog staff about this in the rankings that it should be going live tomorrow or Wednesday, where we update it based on what Cejudo did. And I am of the camp that I want Jones at 1, Cormier at 2, and Cejudo at 3, and that will place him above Khabib Nurmagomedov. So when we're talking about pound for pound greatness, if you hold a belt in multiple divisions, that is the textbook definition. And I think that's something that we tend to get away from when we're talking about pound for pound. So you can add certain people on there who are just good. And this is a point that I know I've made on the Sherdog live chat a couple of times before, man. You can put Robert Whittaker on a pound for pound list. You can put Tony Ferguson on a pound for pound list. You can put a lot of great fighters there. But when you have belts in multiple weight classes, you define pound for pound success. Therefore, you should be atop of a list. I think John Jones might be sort of the exception, because what he's done has been so great at 205
and so long.
But
no thing.
Yeah, and for so long, you see the names that he's decimated along the way. But aside from that guy who's an anomaly to everything else that we understand about MMA, Henry Cejudo it makes a very good argument for being the top pound for pound fighter in the world. So and as far as his claims about being the best combat athlete of all time, I can't really disagree. Like, there are other people that I will put in that conversation, but how many of them have had multiple championships in different sports, in different combat sports? Like, the only other person I can think of off the top of my head is Holly Holm. You know, I think about people who have come close. Yoel Romero, silver medalist in wrestling, never won a UFC belt. Daniel Cormier, two-time champion.
Ronda Rousey, in a sense, obviously.
Right, Ronda Rousey, bronze medalist, though.
Yep, exactly. And not a multiple division champion MMA. You know, like, there's certain things that it's clear that it's really hard to see a one-to-one analog with Henry Cejudo with his accolades. That's a rarity to have an Olympic gold medal, a UFC champion, not only in one division, but two divisions. On top of that, simultaneously, it is hard to stack that up. And, maybe Holly Holm is the closest, but she doesn't have the Olympic pedigree that Cejudo has. And the people that do have...
She does have championships in boxing.
Yeah, but she doesn't have the Olympic pedigree that I think is needed for this discussion.
Right. So, like, more so I'm thinking of success in multiple sports. So I've heard Vasily Lomachenko being brought up in this discussion. And while he is a fantastic athlete and a great example, as boxing has many examples of great Olympic champions and gold medalists who went on to win professional titles, but that's still in the same sport. You know, if Lomachenko were to then get a UFC belt, or to then, get a belt in glory kickboxing or something like that, then we start entering the same stratosphere that Henry Cejudo has put himself in.
No, I understand that. My point was more so of that while Holly Holm does have professional boxing accolades, she doesn't have the Olympic accolades that Henry Cejudo has, regardless of the difference of two division sports, or not two division sports, two different sports in combat sports, and how even especially back then more so, Olympic women's boxing was still sought at as a higher accolade to achieve than even professional women's boxing. That has slowly shifted, and maybe Fu might jump in here. That paradigm is shifting where, people like Clarissa Shields, Katie Taylor are making it more of a norm for high-level amateur female boxers to make the jump to the pros quicker. That wasn't a thing in Holly Holm's era. And when Holly Holm was around, getting a gold medal as a female boxer was the highest level you could achieve, more so than winning some championships in women's professional boxing.
No, I think you're spot on, Matt. Like, the level of competition in Olympic wrestling is almost, to me, when you talk about wrestling period, like, to win a state championship is a huge achievement. To win like a national championship, huge achievement. To win gold in the Olympics, massive fucking achievement, And then to have a belt in women's boxing, even, 10 years ago, it's an achievement. It's a great achievement. I don't want to shit on women's sports or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying, but it's the level of competition wasn't really there to say all-time great athlete because of the holding a belt in boxing and holding a belt in MMA. I think Cejudo would have to have that achievement over someone like a Holly Holm. But then when you talk about Lomachenko, he's a double gold medalist and, a 3-weight champion in boxing and 13 fights. So on that level, yeah, those guys those are huge accomplishments.
I definitely agree with Antho that like guys like Loma can't be included in that list because he's isolated to one sport. You need more of that Bo Jackson vibe that was crossing over sports, doing incredible things. For them,
I'm surprised at the dominance of Cejudo, like the way he dominated Dillashaw, then to go and dominate Moraes like that in 3 rounds. Basically, the second and third round just completely put it on him. That was impressive,
especially when you like. Transport us back to the night that he upset Demetrius Johnson. That was a contentious night with a lot of debate, a lot of people upset. Fu, I think either us three were on a live fight chat or just me and you, Fu. And like we were upset with Johnson's performance, the fight itself. We didn't think it was the cleanest decision, and Cejudo walked away from that. Obviously, Demetrius Johnson was, air quotes, traded to one, so we never got any finality with that story and that, potential trilogy. And Cejudo walked into the TJ Dillashaw fight being the underdog, I think in a lot of people's eyes, smoked him in a minute and a half, and like it wasn't that long. Comes out here
from knocking out Dillashaw.
Yeah.
Was 32 seconds, I think it was.
Something insane like that. And then he walks in this fight. I would honestly say, I forget what the odds were, but it felt like the media and the hardcores pegged him to be the underdog. It felt like we thought that Moraes was going to be too big, too much of a finishing dynamic fighter. On top of that, just seemingly peaking in a way that Cejudo was a little bit more of a question mark. That win over Dillashaw was a question mark due to the weight cut of Dillashaw. And plus, his win over Demetrius Johnson was even questionable. And so connecting to your point, Fu, about being surprised at the level of dominance of Cejudo, I agree with you. I never thought we would be here in 2019 talking about Cejudo being pound for pound, arguably number one. Did anyone think that 6 months ago, a year ago? We all thought he was good. We all thought he was elite, especially in the flyweight division. But to beat Dillashaw and then Moraes in the fashion that he did is just shocking in every sense of the word.
Think about where Henry Cejudo was exactly a year ago. So exactly a year ago yesterday, the UFC announced his rematch with Demetrius Johnson at UFC 227. But the backdrop of this was the presence of Henry Cejudo. Nobody was really paying him much attention there. And I was on the ground for that. That fight took place at the Staples Center. So I was credentialed for that one and at every media engagement. And he wasn't the story. The story was that Demetrius Johnson and TJ Dillashaw were placed on the same card. I remember being in the media room the media day when they had all the fighters there to interview, and there was tension in the room because everybody was staring at Demetrius Johnson. Henry Cejudo wanted a piece of him, obviously, because that was his next opponent. TJ Dillashaw is looking over at him like he wants some. KOTY Garbrandt is trying to insert himself in that conversation, and he's talking about wanting a piece of Demetrius Johnson. Everybody there was about DJ. So to see Henry Cejudo come out of that shadow in that fight, which ended controversially, and even the media room that night was kind of divided on who they thought won and how the judging was and whatnot, and what rounds did this person win. So for him to go as the understory, and then a year later, we are talking about him perhaps being the best fighter alive right now, is nuts. It is insane. It is such a dramatic transformation that you can't really quantify that. I off the top of my head, cannot think of anyone who's had such a dramatic turnaround in a year. Can you guys please correct me if I'm wrong?
Maybe not to the same degree, but Robbie Lawler comes to mind. How quickly his turnaround was when the Strikeforce acquisition. That was rather quick, but not obviously to the degree of Cejudo. Like, no one talked about Robbie Lawler being pound for pound.
The only comparison I could make that would even be close would maybe be like in boxing, a Tevin Farmer.
No, that's not even close. Not even close.
Think?
Not even close. Tevin Farmer's not even on anyone's pound for pound list, man.
Well, I mean, but just like to go from like someone who like people had a little respect for, but then become
but that wasn't within a year. That was worked. That took years of Tevin Farmer's career to get that. 1 year turnaround from, you're kind of elite. Like, you might lose to like Joseph Benavidez. You're probably going to lose to Demetrius Johnson. But you kind of, that's perennial top 5 guy in the division. That's sort of what you are. That's what you're pegged to be. And then in a year, 12 months, you're in the short list for top 3 right now, best fighter on the planet.
I did think of one person that we might be able to put in that discussion. I still say what Cejudo did in a year tops this, but Daniel Cormier had a dramatic turnaround from UFC 214, where he got viciously knocked out, to then, about a year later, he has regained the light heavyweight belt, defended it, then won the heavyweight title, and then managed to defend that as well. So that is the closest thing. But even then, Daniel Cormier started out, he walked into the cage at UFC 214 as one of the known and recognized pound for pound and all-time greats. So even that comparison isn't as dramatic of a rise that Henry Cejudo had this past year.
It wasn't shocking, and it doesn't have the name that like a Dillashaw is at the time. Like the context of that moment of Cejudo knocking out Dillashaw in 30 seconds, I think can't be thrown under the rug in a sense because of the PD suspension. I think that's slightly had an effect on that win, is that people have sort of forgotten about it, or at least tried to forget about it because of Dillashaw's PD suspension. But that win was incredible. And I think even Daniel Cormier's win against Alexander Gustafsson, Stipe Miocic, nothing was as equally shocking as what Cejudo did. That's the thing. Like the shock value of Cejudo's year is almost unparalleled.
Right. Even though the decision over Demetrius Johnson was very close, he still ended on his historic great reign. The all-time greatest championship run in the history of the UFC. He still is the person that ended that. Then to go on and knock out TJ Dillashaw, who at that same event at UFC 227, there was talk after he knocked out Cody Garbrandt for the second time that we were looking at the greatest bantamweight of all time. And the only other name that you could put in that conversation was Dominic Cruz. But it was like, is it Cruz or Dillashaw who's the greatest at 135 of all time? And Cejudo knocks him out in 32 seconds. And then Marlon Moraes, who was the World Series of Fighting champion, he is actually the guy that many were picking to dethrone Dillashaw. So that he handled him so easily after handing Dillashaw so easily, and then after ending the run of the greatest champion the UFC has seen, at least from a statistical standpoint. I mean, that puts you in a different level. That puts you in a whole nother air than a lot of other greats out there.
Agreed. Any sort of last thoughts on Cejudo? We do have to move on.
Those post-fight call-outs make no sense.
I didn't hear it because I had the volume down. What was
he called out Cruz? He called out Faber. He called out Garbrandt, and he is saying he wants to take on 145 next.
Okay, whatever CBD is sponsoring Cejudo, please get a new one because it's obviously affecting you too much.
Or instead of getting a new one, we need to advertise that, and we need to try it ourselves.
That's also a good point. Also a very good point. Because none of those names make sense. Like Garbrandt, what? I mean, best case scenario as a hardcore fan is that he goes back down to 125, defends that title against Joseph Benavidez. Or at least the winner of Benavidez Formiga. That is best case scenario, but I don't think that happens. I think Fu mentioned it earlier. I think it's highly likely now that we see Cejudo just stay at 135. Because why not? I mean, why cut the weight when you're the champion at 135? It's the better division with more money fights for you. And 125 is going to die a very slow, painful death. Probably the same as 145 post-Cyborg testing the free market, which we'll get to later on the show.
Well, so I don't know if we have time for the rabbit hole, but aren't there only like 6 or 7 fighters at that weight right now, 125?
I think 7? It's like 10 or 11 left 10? Or something like that.
Yeah.
It's 10? Oh, that's not bad.
I think so. I mean, obviously that's not enough to run a full-on division that has like clear stakes and meritocracy. So that's another ballpark there. We do know that all signs point to this being pushed out of the door as they're continuing to cut people, and some guys are moving up to bantamweight and whatnot. But the thing is, it's so strange because after this fight, Dana White at the post-fight presser did say that the flyweights were going to stick around. He did say for the first time since this controversy arose that he planned on keeping the flyweights operating, and that he thought that Henry Cejudo could be the guy to go up and down in weight to defend both belts. So I do think if Cejudo wants to do that, he might. if Joseph Benavidez beats Formiga, because keep in mind Cejudo already has a win over Formiga, but he has a loss to Benavidez. If Benavidez wins, that is still a fight that you can market. That's a fight that Cejudo might be interested in simply because he'd like to get that one back. And if he is able to go back down to 125 and defend that belt and then move back up to 135, not only will he, enjoy being on a list of 3 other people, Conor McGregor, Amanda Nunes, and Daniel Cormier, that have simultaneously held 2 belts, but then he'll be the only person to actually be able to defend both belts after winning them. So, and the closest being Cormier, because he defended light heavyweight before moving up to heavyweight to win and defend that belt. So I do think that if Cejudo is really got his eye to history like he claims to be doing, and like his actions are showing, this might be another wrinkle that might keep flyweight going just a little bit longer, because there just might be one more title fight ahead.
I want to live in your world, Anthony. I like that world. I don't think it's
a beautiful world.
I don't think it's reality, but I mean, it's a nice world.
It's sexy.
I wouldn't use that word, but sure.
It's my world. It's sexy.
Moving on. Valentina Shevchenko rocked Jessica Ai's world, knocking her out in vicious fashion with a left high kick. And I gotta say, this is probably a knockout of the year. At least it's on the short list, just for how emphatically she was knocked out. Like, Jessica Ai was out cold for a worrying amount of time, honestly. Like, I was worried. It seemed like everyone else was worried. But I think that sort of adds sort of a dread factor to the knockout. But Shevchenko was just dominant. Like, I'm at this point now with this division and with her title reign where I see no one beating her. I think her real test is going to be either trying to go down to 115 or trying to go back up to 135. I don't think there's anyone, obviously we can talk about the Caitlin Chookagian and Joanne Calderwood fight later, but there's really no number one contender out there that is actually going to give her a real tough fight. And your thoughts on A, obviously the performance of Valentina, and B, the knockout itself, and is it knockout of the year?
So Valentina authored what possibly is the knockout of the year. I don't think there's any way around it. I mean, but here's the strange thing that we've seen in the past probably couple of months or so. It seems like every week there is a potential knockout of the year that happens, because last week we were talking about Jimmy Manawa getting slept by Rakic. So there seems to be an extra amount of dramatic jaw-dropping knockouts this year, and I like it. So, but Valentina Shevchenko definitely, I think she stands out right now simply because the setup was so perfect. The setup was so perfect, and normally when someone goes to the body like that and then goes to the head, it takes a little bit longer for them to start mixing up the levels. But as a viewer, just when I was getting into the rhythm of the body kick and thinking, oh man, that liver shot is wide open. Oh, that liver shot, here it is. I get into that rhythm, and then next thing you know, her shin is skipping off of Jessica Ai's temple. So I think as a viewer, that was probably the more jarring one to watch. As far as her reign at 125, lording over that division, there is no one that we can realistically, at least on paper, say is going to be a challenge. Of course, they have to get in the cage and they have to fight, but Caitlin Chookagian, no, that it's just not going to cut it. She's not mobile enough in her striking. Then also the next one up would be Liz Carmouche and Roxanne Modafferi. I think they fight in a couple of weeks. Liz Carmouche does have a win over Shevchenko, like well earlier into her career.
Yep.
But realistically, do we see that fight going the same way? I don't. I don't think any of you guys do either. Roxanne Modafferi, as much as she's improved, she's still not even close to the level of athlete that Shevchenko is. That division is hers to lord over, and I do think it's good for women's mixed martial arts and for the UFC if she stays there and she doesn't want to skip around in weight classes. We've seen so many super fights. We've seen everyone jumping up and down weight, but it's good to have someone who can just consistently provide highlight reel finishes and get some interest going in this division. Someone who can challenge her is out there. We just haven't seen them yet. I'm pretty certain that there is no female flyweight in the UFC right now who can see Valentina Shevchenko. And in the meantime, we'll get some cool finishes out of it.
I'm of the mind that some strawweights might move up and give her like really good fights. Obviously, like Andrade can give her a really tough fight at 125, in my opinion. Tatiana Suarez, style-wise, that might be a really interesting fight at 125, maybe a year or two down the line.
I doubt she can make...
No, at 125.
125, okay.
Tatiana Suarez is moving up. I'm talking about 115 pounders moving up to 125. I do doubt that Shevchenko can make the weight. I think she's going to have to draw some of those strawweights up because the strawweights are the moneymakers. Like, she's in this position now where Shevchenko's a name that the UFC is going to pay well, but she's not in any big fight out there at 125. The big fights out there are other people in other divisions. So you're going to have to sort of make super fights for Shevchenko. Not necessarily moving forward. You could give her a Liz Carmouche next or somebody like that and put Shevchenko as a co-main again and be okay with that. But I think moving forward, you do need to look for some super fights for her. Or maybe a trilogy fight with Amanda Nunes. I know some people don't like that because none of the fights have been entertaining. But I think something like that is going to happen because competitively speaking, no one's going to test her. Fu. Sorry.
Oh, no. Go ahead, Fu.
Fu, thoughts on Shevchenko getting the arguable knockout of the year here?
Yeah, I think for me right now, it's knockout of the year. It was just so clean and it was unexpected. Like I'm with Ant that I was just kind of getting in the rhythm of the fight. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh shit. I was like in the back watching it when we were closing at work. And I was just like, had to watch it like 3 times, man. Cause she just got laid out so clean.
And so quick too. I was the same way. I was watching it live and I kind of had on in the background. I was doing something. And like you said, Ant, like the rhythm of the fight had me thinking, we're going to be in there for a bit. I can sit down, relax. Shevchenko's going to take her time. And then, boom, 1 second, head kick, gone.
Yeah, and it was weird. It was like, I don't know if, when she threw the kick, it's like she changed it. I don't know. I'd have to watch it again. But it just seemed like she made the adjustment real quick to know, like, oh, man, she's going to try to defend the body. Let me catch her right in the head. And it was just perfectly placed. But what I love the most about MMA is that the women shine so much in MMA. And we're starting maybe to get that in boxing a little bit. But I just love that they fight the same 5 minutes, the same amount of rounds. And there's knockouts and finishes in women's MMA that we just don't get in boxing. And I really think that that's probably, to me, like a point of pride for even like doing shows with you guys about MMA is just that women are really able to shine in the sport. And it was badass to see that knockout and show it to other people and have them be like, damn, man, that woman's badass, and the people at work just being like, dude, who is that? And I'm like, Shevchenko, she's a monster. And everyone's just freaking out. Like, oh my God, a girl just knocked that person out like that, and it's really cool. I love that about the sport. And that KO was just, it was a highlight of the night to me.
Hey, Fu, I think you brought up a really good point there because we previously had that with Chris Cyborg. I mean, quite frankly, we still do. Like she still will provide us some good highlight real finishes, especially if Felicia Spencer is in fact that fight does go down. At least my prediction for that one. But we do need someone like that to keep the casual interest in women's mixed martial arts going. And with Cyborg nearing the end of her career, this is a wide open spot for Shevchenko. This spot is wide open for a woman to dominate. And I'm talking about the level of domination that Anderson Silva showed against the number one contenders at middleweight, who we knew were going to get beat up, but we watched anyway, and it was exciting. That's something that women's mixed martial arts desperately needs, and Valentina Shevchenko can continually provide that, especially as we near the end of Cyborg's run.
To that point about like the void of that top sort of women's fighter or woman fighter at the moment to sort of be the headline marquee name. Ronda Rousey's gone. Cyborg is near the end of her career, it seems, or at least towards the end of her UFC run, it seems, at least. Thug Rose just lost and is like going off to the farm and like may not do anything, but you know, quickly, the guy in the chat, you're gone. Bye. Anyways, digressing. Do we not think that Amanda Nunes is going to be around for a bit to hold that down? Is the win against Cyborg enough of a transference of star power for her? It feels like her social media presence is different post that fight. Feels like the attention on her is different post that Cyborg win. But if it's not Nunes, if it's not Shevchenko, is there anyone out there right now that you see as that person that could fill that void to be that marquee name? Or is it hopefully one of those two names?
Well, Nunes has been talking about retirement as of late. Mm-hmm. So I don't think she's going to be long for this sport either. But if you're not talking about Valentina Shevchenko, I think a more developed Tatiana Suarez could be that. But she does, as the fight against Nina Ansaroff showed, she does need some work. She needs some development before she can step into a role like that. But I do think she has the tenacity. She has the base level style, the foundation to be that dominant force that women's mixed martial arts can use.
I'm not as sold as some are on Suarez. Not from a technical perspective. I think she is highly talented. Again, she has like 10 fights. Like she's a very limited career thus far, and also a stunted one due to injuries. But I don't know about the star power yet. I think that is wide open. You mentioning that has make me start to think a little bit about who could that be. Paige Van Zandt's not, I think, committed to the sport enough. Plus, injuries seem to be an issue at this point.
And she's not good enough.
Yeah, that too. Mackenzie Dern is another one that I think is A, not good enough. B, doesn't seem as interested in MMA as some people would hope. Who else could be? There's no one really on the up at 135 that's an up-and-coming name in any way. That's an issue in terms of star power, in terms of who could be that female to hold down women's MMA for the next 5-10 years. That should be a thing that the UFC are looking at and worried about in some fashion. But to Fu's point, back to your point, Fu, I do agree with you that women's MMA is just, it's treated so differently compared to other women's sports, and that's always just a breath of fresh air. Even though the fan base at times is still extremely toxic, because MMA fans are just a bunch of Neanderthals most of the time, they do sort of platform women in a way that we only hope in boxing.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder, and I think, you guys obviously could speak better to this than I could, but do you think there's going to be a move by the UFC to go after like a Valerie Loretta if she does well enough in her Bellator stuff? I mean, do you see her being a star? She seems like she's got that.
There are a few names. Like, Loretta does have a little bit of that it factor in a way. And plus, she's good looking. It seems like she has all of the push in the world from a corporate perspective. Like, they are pushing her. And so that's going to play dividends down the road. And your sort of thoughts on Loretta or any other sort of name on the outskirts of the UFC that in 3-5 years time could be something. Kayla Harrison maybe, but weight class is an issue there.
Yeah, Kayla Harrison definitely comes to mind, but like you said, weight class. She's fighting at 155, which is almost non-existent for a lot of women, enough to make a real division. And so we see like her closest competition, at least from what we're seeing on paper right now, is in PFL is Sarah Kaufman, who was a bantamweight that's moving up a lot to make the limit for lightweight. And Laredo is good. She's very good. And I think she has a lot of potential, but I think we also need to temper our expectations. Bellator picked her up so raw and so new that they're still going to have a lot of just silly matchmaking in an effort to build her up. So, and during her, what was supposed to be her MMA debut, her original opponent, whose name I cannot remember, was, I think, an 0-12 amateur that they called up for this. The commission refused to let it happen. And then she fought the young lady she fought and beat her. But then now her next opponent is a waitress at Hooters, and literally signed her bout agreement in uniform at Hooters. Like this is the level of matchmaking that's going on right now.
Please tell me
Laredo.
Please tell me Bellator had like a promo that featured that. Please tell me.
You can go on their social media, on someone's social media. I saw this. The young lady was in her Hooters uniform with a pin and the bout agreement in front of her with a big smile and signing on for her Bellator debut.
But look, I'll say this. I'd rather have them take the very slow path with Laredo instead of the whatever path they did with Aaron Pico. Because they had a blue chip prospect in their hand from the beginning of his career. And I'm not going to say he is ruined because it's MMA and MMA is vastly different, but the amount of knockouts he's had in that short amount of fights that he's had is a concerning thing. And Bellator let him basically run his career and matchmake himself. I hope they take a more of a guided hand with Laredo's career. Even though, like you say, and we're gonna get some Bellator matchmaking at its finest here at times. We're gonna get some showcases.
And I don't want to throw Bellator's matchmaking in the trash as far as Laredo is concerned right now, because this is kind of what you should expect with someone who's going into their second MMA fight. You're not going to throw them in there the way they did with Aaron Pico. You do want to have more of a slow build, but then you also are looking at this on a world stage and Bellator being a huge promotion. It just looks bad. The optics look kind of crazy. Like we talk about, what's his name? Jake Hager.
Yeah.
And some of the matchmaking associated with him. But I mean, it's essentially a regional fight and a regional level fighter that we're watching on a national stage. And that's more so the issue. But then Bellator also has done what they did with MVP, where it took forever to actually unleash real qualified, threatening talent against him and stylistic matches that might not do him well. And we're seeing the results of him in real competition now. And MVP has been crushing skulls for quite some time in Bellator with that level of matchmaking. So as long as they don't, here's the thing, like, and I know it might sound kind of contradictory because I'm hoping that Shevchenko gets some of this sort of treatment, but there's a big difference between being purposely matched up to maim and slaughter, and it's another thing when you're so good that the best that they have to offer gets maimed and slaughtered. Shevchenko is of the ilk where the best you have to offer at 125 in the UFC is probably going to get maimed and slaughtered, as opposed to the worst of predatory matchmaking to handpick someone to get maimed and slaughtered.
Speaking of maimed and slaughtered, Don Cerrone's eye got fucking maimed to hell due to him trying to blow out a broken nose in a really fun fight with Tony Ferguson that unfortunately got halted before I think it really started to amp up in terms of violence. Tony Ferguson winning the fight via TKO, obviously, because of the eye injury from Don Cerrone and via the doctor stoppage. Don Cerrone having a really good first round, controlling sort of the pace of the fight with the jab, the range of the fight with the jab. And then Ferguson just slowly started upping the volume, upping the aggression. On top of that, that sneaky power of Ferguson is just sneaky. Like, it really is. It took me a while, even live, to catch up to, like, oh, shit, Cerrone's in danger here. Like, watching it live, it took me a second to realize, oh, this isn't good. I thought Cerrone was in control. Even heading into the second, like, midway through the second round, I'm like, nope. I have to figure out, nope, this is not what's going down. I have to reassess what I'm watching here. And Ferguson has a way of, again, sort of creeping up in a fight without you realizing it. I thought in a fight that had a lot of eyeballs on it, A, because it's a great fight, but B, because we all wanted to see how Tony Ferguson was going to behave due to his out-of-the-cage situations that's been going on. Has he sort of passed the test here in his comeback fight, air quotes comeback fight? Do we want to run it back in any way to make sure Tony Ferguson's 100% there, or fuck that, have Tony Ferguson rest and you can ship him out to Abu Dhabi where we can watch Khabib destroy Dustin Poirier. And your thoughts on A, obviously this performance, this fight itself, and B is sort of, again, Tony Ferguson. Does he pass the test of being okay, whatever that means?
As far as the fight itself was fantastic for how it lasted. And I don't want them to run this one back. I definitely don't want them to run this back because we saw what was happening. We saw Donald Cerrone getting overwhelmed. And this is, now, while Cerrone is a notorious slow starter, so is Tony Ferguson. And we've seen them both kind of have the same sort of issues in the early goings of a fight. But we've also seen Ferguson consistently be able to drown people. We saw him do it to Kevin Lee. We saw him do it to Rafael dos Anjos. We saw him do it to Edson Barboza. We've seen him do it to some of the best in the world, and he will drag you out there. And little by little, next thing you know, you are overwhelmed by a ridiculous amount of offense. He threw so many strikes in that, so many spinning elbows, so many awkward combinations of kicks followed by punch combinations. It was such a weird gumbo of ass kickery that I don't think Donald Cerrone had an answer for it. And Cerrone is obviously an infinitely tough person who likes to fight and it sadistically just seemed to enjoy it as well. I mean, he had his eyes swollen shut and had a big smile leaving the cage afterwards. So, but it didn't look like he offered anything to in return from a technical standpoint. And I just think Ferguson would have just kept on overwhelming him, and we probably would have seen something ugly happen, uglier than the eye. Now, as far as what you do next with Tony Ferguson, if we're talking about Tony Ferguson in anything other than a title shot, it is blatant, willful, and ridiculous disrespect. That man deserves a title shot. He has 12 consecutive wins at lightweight in the UFC. The UFC lightweight division is the most talent-rich division in all of mixed martial arts by far. And for someone to run through it like a buzzsaw the way he has, keep in mind the only time he's lost was a very, very close split decision with Michael Johnson way back, like I think 2013 or something like that maybe. We've seen nothing but excellence and dominance from Tony Ferguson. We've seen him with a belt around his waist before, and we've seen him not lose that belt. Get that man a title shot. Anything else, I just can't accept.
I'll play devil's advocate quickly. You have the winner of Khabib Poirier. You have the winner of Diaz Pettis. You have Justin Gaethje. You telling me if they match up Ferguson versus Gaethje, Ferguson versus the winner of Diaz Pettis, that doesn't do it for you in any way?
From an action standpoint, yes. I mean, I would watch any fight with Justin Gaethje. That's one cool thing about the lightweight division. Any mix and match you do with any of those big names, anybody in essentially the top 15, you can pair them all kinds of ways, and it is going to be a great fight. So that's not the question. The question is, Are we talking about Tony Ferguson as a championship caliber fighter? Because if we're not, we're having the wrong conversation. He is a man who deserves a title shot, and it was, due to unfortunate circumstances, has been stripped away from him. And we're talking about Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje was coming off of he came off of the Barboza win, but before that, he lost to, was it Poirier and Alvarez? Oh no, James Vick, and he beat James Vick, and he lost
to Poirier.
Yeah, so what is he? 2-2 in his last 4.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Tony Ferguson 12-0 in his last 12. Then you put Pettis and Diaz in the conversation, but this fight is going to be contested at welterweight. Last time we saw Anthony Pettis, he was losing to Tony Ferguson at lightweight. Last time we saw Nate Diaz at lightweight was when he defeated Michael Johnson in, was it 2015? I believe it was December of 2015. So all the other names that you can bring up in this conversation don't hold a candle to what he's been doing lately. And please do not say Conor McGregor, because last time we saw him, he was tapping out to Khabib Nurmagomedov. So the only way these names, I think, jump ahead of Tony Ferguson is if we're talking about things other than the fight itself. If we're talking about from a business standpoint, yes, Conor McGregor and the winner of Dustin and Khabib, it will probably do more numbers. If we're talking about Anthony Pettis instead of Ferguson, yes, that probably will do more numbers. But if we're talking about legitimate sporting integrity, and I know I always say sporting integrity all the time, but this is one of those times where I need to bang on the table and say sporting integrity. Tony Ferguson belongs in the title shot, nothing less than that.
Please tell me why you always leave. Please tell me why you always leave.
I'll admit I actually agree with you, but I just want to play that soundbite because I admit I do think Khabib or Dustin, whoever wins that fight versus Tony Ferguson, makes the most sense in the world. But man, Tony Ferguson versus Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje, all those fights are amazing. I won't be mad at anything. Fu, your thoughts on Donald Cerrone losing to Tony Ferguson? Tony Ferguson most likely being the number 1 contender.
I think you guys nailed it. Ferguson's so good. It seems like he's dominant every single fight. There's just almost not like they don't have an answer for him, because I think Cowboy actually had a pretty good showing, like stand up, it seemed like they traded a lot in that first round. And then, Ferguson, he really got going a little bit more in the second round. And I think it was, I felt like it was like a really sneaky kind of elbow that got him that really hurt that eye. But, if I'm remembering that right. But I'm with I think most of the MMA community is going to be really upset if Ferguson doesn't get a title shot.
Yeah.
It seems like people are really frustrated with how dominant he's been and how he's not gotten, he's gotten the opportunities, but then he had some injuries, right? Like doing a press tour, he got injured, I think, at one point when he was supposed to fight for a belt, and couple other things. But I think if they go Khabib and Poirier, whoever wins that, if that person doesn't fight Ferguson, I feel like there's going to be some fan outcry that's, the UFC is going to have to pay attention to at some point, that people want to see Ferguson get that opportunity. He's earned it, but all those other fights are really fun, and Ferguson's never in boring fights. So, I mean, you're going to watch him anytime. But I would love to see the Khabib Ferguson fight, or if Poirier beats Khabib, a Poirier Ferguson fight, because I think he's competitive in any fight he's in.
Agreed. Quick rundown of the rest of the card. Might briefly talk about some of these. Peter Yan defeating Jimmy Rivera via unanimous decision. Really fun fight, and really won by the dramatic moments of the late round knockdowns, and every round I think it was, right? There was a late round knockdown in the fight. Blagoy Ivanov defeating Tuivasa. Kind of upsetting because I was a big Tuivasa fan. That guy's always hilarious. Tatiana Suarez defeating Nina Anaserov via unanimous decision. Aljamain Sterling God, let me get the air horns for Aljamain Sterling, man. God, I remember when this guy was a trendsetter as a free agent in 2014, 15. Like it feels like it was a while ago now, and he really faced a lot of trials and tribulations in terms of fights post that big sort of spotlight on his back, on him as a fighter. His brand improved overall, his profile improved, and he started to gain losses. You know, it was really this weird or really unfortunate sort of circumstance where simultaneously he had the biggest amount of eyeballs on him, and he also had some of his biggest losses in his career. He's obviously evolved as a fighter. His striking has looked better and better with each fight, and he pieced up Pedro Munoz in that fight. Shout out to Aljamain Sterling. Alexa Grasso defeating Carolina Kowalkiewicz via unanimous decision. Just walked her down. Not walked her down, sorry. She outboxed, outfought Carolina. Carolina was trying to walk her down and just was ineffective. Calvin Kattar defeated Ricardo Lamas. Angelina Hill losing via unanimous decision versus Jan. I'm not going to try to pronounce your first name. Darren Stewart defeating Bevon Lewis. That was actually a really shocking win. I thought Bevon Lewis might win that. Eddie Wineland getting a win against Gregory Popov, and Caitlin Chikogan defeating Joanne Caldwell via unanimous decision. I know some people had that the other way. If you want to get more of an in-depth breakdown of all those fights, go over to the Walkout Network. Check out Anthony Walker's Walk of Shame show post that event. If you want to find that a little bit easier, it's on this YouTube channel. So go just hit the back button, go to our channel page, and it's right there towards the bottom in our affiliates and friends of the show section. But guys, any sort of highlights of the card you guys want to make mention of? Otherwise, we'll be heading to a different topic.
I mean, overall, this card was great. It was a lot of action. Aside from the Stewart and Lewis fight, this was a overall very entertaining card. So we had everything from violent knockouts like the Eddie Wineland and Popov fight. We had the close decision between Calderwood and Chikagian. Alexa Grasso showed a lot of growth in her game as well.
And a
Calvin
comeback,
Kattar,
too. And a comeback. Grasso was out for, what, a year and a half, 2 years? Like, she was out for a while.
Right. I think we need to start paying a lot more attention to Calvin Kattar as well. He's making some serious moves. Defeating Ricardo Lamas is something that only the best have been able to do so far. Like we did say before, Tatiana Suarez is showing some holes in that game that do need to be closed up before we can really start talking about her and fulfilling the potential that a lot of people see in her. Blagoy Ivanov, I think, has established himself as a heavyweight that we need to be paying more attention to. He seems to get better with every fight. So I do think this card overall showed a lot of good for the future of what we can see in the UFC.
Agreed. Let's move on.
Real quick, Matt. I was just going to say that the fight I was looking forward to was Rivera and Jan, and Jan looks like a serious player, like great, like putting Rivera down, like he did. Rivera's a tough fucking guy. I know he couldn't finish the fight, but he seems like he's going to really be a big time player.
Agree.
A great striker.
And his sort of meteoric rise to this division has been not only, again, meteoric, it has been fast, but it has been devastating. He has just been wiping out competition. Jim Rivera did put up a really good fight, though. I thought Rivera was winning in most of the rounds. He just happened to lose them all because he was getting hurt towards the end, and hurt significantly towards the end. Moving on, though, we made mention of it. Khabib versus Poirier is official. UFC 242 in Abu Dhabi. I think this is their second time? No, the third or second time at Abu Dhabi. You're muted, by the way. Guys.
Yeah, sorry. It's their second time. They haven't been back since the first show in 2010. I think that was UFC 142, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. But anyways, really interested to see, obviously, this fight This is probably one of the fights I'm most looking forward to this year. I made a joke about Khabib, destroying Dustin earlier, but I think this is a really fascinating fight in terms of the stylistic matchup. Poirier's southpaw stance, I think, is going to be interesting in terms of just setting up shots and angles that he likes to throw against Khabib, who I think is going to be susceptible to it. But also, Khabib is a guy that's been improving his boxing with every fight. Also, if Khabib takes down Dustin, talk about one of the most dynamic guys on the ground is Dustin Poirier. He's probably on the short list for guys at 155, 145 historically for being dynamic grapplers. I'm excited to see how his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu game really meshes with just the grinding style of Khabib. Fascinating about this fight. The location of it is pretty obvious due to Khabib being a Muslim, his connections to Kadyrov, who has connections to Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries. But I digress from that other political point that maybe some other reporter might break more into and dive more into. But Anthony, your thoughts on Khabib Poirier, it being official? How competitive is this fight in your mind? And is Poirier secretly the guy that is actually the most well equipped to beat Khabib in the division?
The way I'm thinking of it now, I don't think Dustin Poirier is the style guy to really give Khabib what we can see. I think Justin Gaethje is more so that guy. Out of the current roster, Justin Gaethje is probably the one that I would have the most time, the most ease in picking over Khabib Nurmagomedov right now. But that being said, Dustin Poirier has greatly improved almost with every fight. You look at what he's been able to do against Max Holloway, against Eddie Alvarez in both their first fight and the rematch. What he was able to do against Gaethje. I mean, Dustin Poirier is someone who has deceptive power. He has a lot of speed. I think the one thing that gives me pause for Poirier's chances against Khabib is that his comfort level just playing against the fence, and that's just the place you don't want to be against Khabib. So, in that sense, yeah, I think Dustin has a rough night, but I do think he's good enough to at least give Khabib some sort of moments of reflection. I'm reminded of the Michael Johnson fight against Khabib, and I know that's something that we highlight a lot when we talk about Khabib's weaknesses, and we could also point to, I guess, the third round against McGregor, where you see him become more susceptible to striking. But Poirier has to stay away from that fence. If he can keep it toward the middle of the cage, that will be his best bet. But Khabib, man, is just. He's another animal. I mean, they're putting him in Abu Dhabi for a reason. The first time that the UFC went to Abu Dhabi, it was because of the partnership with Flash Entertainment. They had just bought a 10% stake in the company, but now that stake in the company has long since been sold. They're no longer part owners that they're trying to impress there. It's simply to put on a display for the Muslim majority. And Khabib went on a literal world tour after defeating Conor at UFC 229. So they're trying to put a global superstar in essentially what could be functioning as a de facto backyard. I think they know what they're doing here. I think they're setting up a moment for Khabib, but he's probably not going to just go in there and just walk through Dustin.
Yeah, I agree. Fu, your thoughts on Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Dustin Poirier? Is it the fight to dethrone Khabib or to make people be shocked and huge upset, or is Ant more right in that Dustin Poirier is not going to be the stylistic nightmare for Khabib, and maybe it's someone else in the division?
Yeah, overall, I think I agree with that assessment. Poirier, obviously, though, is is a great striker, but so was Conor, right? And Conor really wasn't able to bother Khabib. It's just a matter of, you know, Khabib he's just gonna try to get on the inside and maul him, you know, and he has the gas tank to do it for as long as it takes for the other guy to quit. I feel like you're right on the him being a very dynamic grappler, Poirier, and I feel like if there's any moment, he has enough power to really, I think, hurt Khabib if he times him right or something. But that's kind of how I think everyone's felt going up against Khabib, is like, you know, well, maybe someone has a puncher's chance to knock him out when he's, you know, moving in to take him down or something. But he doesn't make those mistakes, it seems like. And then you see him catch Conor and put Conor down in their fight. And it's like, okay, well, now he's even getting better on his stand-up game. So I don't think he's going to beat Khabib. I really feel like in that weight class, I don't know who's going to beat Khabib. He's too good. Like, it just seems like Iaquinta was his toughest fight, wouldn't you say? I mean, in terms of
I mean, Gleison Tebow, if we want to go that far back, but
yeah.
And Khabib, as we know him today, yeah, probably, but also that was a short notice fight. I mean, that fight was made on 24 hours notice, so I don't think we can fault him for, you know, for. And then also, I think he kind of hot dogged a lot of that fight too. I don't think he really gave it his best effort. He didn't go out there and attempt to do what he normally does. He went out there and tried some stuff to see if it would work.
But the thing with Khabib is, like, not a direct one-to-one comparison, but like it's almost like Mayweather, where like you don't have any losses, you don't have any real tough fights that he went through. We can go and point at, this is where he struggles in. He has moments that he struggled. There was that moment with Michael Johnson where he struggled. There's that round with Gleison Tebow where he struggled. He wasn't able to really get his takedowns going, and Gleison Tebow, I think, was able to get him down, I think, to the ground. You know, and Iaquinta had moments within a couple rounds late. That was it, though. Like, there really hasn't been a guy to have sustained success against Khabib in any fight. And therefore, it is really hard to predict who is the guy to do that. Who is the guy to have sustained success against that person who's so great at upsetting everyone's rhythm.
And so, like, my take on it is the guy that's really going to trouble Khabib is a guy who has a monster gas tank that can go the full 5 without getting worn out from Khabib's just relentless onslaught of takedowns and just smothering him for, you know, the entire round and stuff. You know, just a tough as nails kind of guy. And I think
Tony.
Yeah, you know, like a Tony for sure. They can just go. Like, Tony didn't even look phased after how the striking that they were putting on. He wasn't even breathing hard.
Yo, Tony Ferguson won that fight and was so upset he won that fight.
Yeah, he was mad that they didn't get another round, you know?
Did you see the videos that some of the media members were posting from Press Row of the two fighters leaving the cage? Cerrone is walking out of the cage, having lost the fight, having his face broken, like he literally broke his orbital, eyes swollen shut, and he's smiling and looked happy. And he's holding his kid, and it looks like this guy just had the best day of his life, yet he looked like Quasimodo. And then for Tony Ferguson, who just had this dramatic comeback in life, and was able to put it on one of the best fighters and most popular fighters in the UFC, continue this historic winning streak, and he walks out of that cage and he looked like he was angry and sad.
Well, you know what? I gotta say this. A large part of that's due to that crowd, man. That was such a shit Chicago crowd. If you
That crowd was super trash.
So trash.
Throwing stuff into the cage because the fight was called off since a guy couldn't see out of one eye. What a bunch of fools.
You can tell they were White Sox fans. I'll just say that. Secondly, if that was a real MMA crowd, they would have known the moment that was with Tony Ferguson. And I think they would have recognize that. Because I did. I was sitting there going like, man, Tony's back. Like, we were so worried about him as a community. First, we were kind of like scared about what was happening, and then it sort of more news came out from his wife, and it sort of made us less worried about him being, a danger to anyone. And then it became more about, oh, maybe he's just a danger to himself. Maybe there's some health risk there, or something that's just been undiagnosed. And he came back from all of that kind of quiet. Didn't really do that much media, it seemed like, Anthony. Like, I know he did media, but it didn't seem like he did that much. He didn't do any more than was required of him. And that was a fun fight. It didn't get stopped the way he wanted it, and the entire crowd is booing him, throwing stuff at him. It just makes me sad, man, honestly. Like, there's moments like we talk about, like Food mentioned earlier, like, there's moments like we can really uplift the sport, like women's MMA. Like, that's always been a shining beacon of this sport recently, has been how great we treat it. And then there's been moments like Tony Ferguson where it's like, damn, like, we can't do better. We can't do better by our guys, our fighters, because a guy like that who has the potential mental issues, honestly, like, I worry about how he takes those situations. Like, I really do. For his own self-health, I worry about that. It's just unfortunate situation. When the fight itself was fun, like, that was a fun fight. I was completely okay with the stoppage. He obviously could not see out of that eye. They should have stopped it. Like, there should be there was nothing about that fight that should upset fans, and yet that entire crowd was upset, and it potentially made a mentally ill fighter more insecure, more, self-loathing, whatever it is that's wrong with him, and that's a deep concern for me.
That crowd had the combined IQ of a raisin. It's like the dumbest possible display of foolishness ever. To boo those guys after what they did, after what Tony Ferguson did in the cage and outside the cage, and Cerrone begging to keep fighting, and the man can clearly only see out of one eye.
And Tony having the fucking sort of understanding and awareness go interview Cowboy first. Like, he's obviously the fan favorite. He's going to calm the crowd down. I mean, raise his hand. He did all the right things to sort of calm that crowd down, and they did not calm down at all. So freaking upsetting, man.
Well, and this is kind of like a pattern, man. Like, what was it? Was it UFC North Carolina, or was it in Phoenix one where we were like really disgusted with the crowd the whole time?
I think it was Phoenix.
Yeah, Phoenix with the Kane and Ngannou fight.
So bad.
Yeah, man. There's this issue with crowds in combat sports overall, where if two guys don't just go in there and lay into each other, which Cowboy and Tony did. So I don't understand that. I mean, from round one, they center of the ring, just put it on each other. So that's weird in itself. But there's this whole thing where, like, if anyone is tactical about the fight, or is it all like just really focused on the win and not focused on just smashing each other's face in, that the crowds are just shitty. And it's like, number one, UFC fighters deserve way more respect for what they do. I mean, they don't get paid near what these other, like, boxers get paid, or other sports figures get paid. They're putting it all on the line. And then to throw shit and hit commentators and other people in the crowd and throw shit in the octagon, like, that's just garbage. That behavior is so fucking disgusting. It's ridiculous.
The only time, like, fan like rioting, not actual rioting, like, anytime like that's okay is when it's like country versus country and it's like a football match, or like it's like for boxing it would be like a Mexican fighter versus a Puerto Rican fighter. Like, I'm okay with crowds getting antsy and getting a little bit fired up at each other at that time, because that's what crowds do in that moment. But never throw things in the cage or in the ring. Never fucking do that. And on top of that, when a fighter just came back from what Tony Ferguson came back from and had that performance, don't do what you do. Chicago, like, any crowd out there looking forward or going forward, like, don't do what they did. Be smart. Be a better fan. But anyways, guys, let's move on to a happier topic. A topic that I want Ant to eat his words on, because he was on Twitter out here saying like, Nate Diaz is dead to us. Proud of 40 for him. Like, he's done to me. And what, like,
say all that.
I in my story you did. And then like I want to say like a week later, Nate Diaz comes out here like, nope, I'm fighting guys. And on top of that, I'm fighting Anthony Pettis, who just had a knockout of the year performance against Stephen Thompson. That was honestly upset of the year as well. Nate Diaz is just fantastic, because not only is this fight a perfect Nate Diaz fight to come back on, in my opinion, with all the added context to it, but the fact that allegedly it was Diaz's camp that called Pettis' camp, and then they together went to the UFC to set this fight up, makes amazing sense, and actually what led me to believe that this story was true when it first started getting reported. Because every time Dana White was coming out there, the UFC was coming out there ahead of the story and saying, this is the fight for Nate Diaz, I knew instantly it wasn't going to happen. Why? Because Nate Diaz will do the exact opposite of what Dana White and the UFC want. But Nate Diaz allowed to make his own fight, be his own matchmaker, be his own fucking promoter. He will do that. And you add in a fight like Anthony Pettis, which I think does interest him. Fuck yeah. I am all in favor of this fight. Sexy is back. Nate Diaz is back. Anthony, get out of here. Okay, the real sexy is here. It's Nate Diaz.
Let's not slander the name of sexy, but this is a pretty cool thing. I do kind of remember what you were talking about, and it was more
you and Jason were shitting on Nate Diaz.
No, we weren't
much.
shitting on Nate Diaz. We were shitting on the idea that every time a Diaz brother says or tweets something, that it becomes news. That is not news. The only news that I genuinely care about is, are they healthy and safe as human beings? Okay, good. Are they fighting?
And
okay, those are the only two things that I care. That I care. Whenever one of them tweets some random cryptic, I was smoking up too much sort of bullshit, that's not on my radar. That's not something that I think warrants attention. Now, Nate Diaz fighting Anthony Pettis and how this fight came together, yes, that warrants all the attention in the world. Sign me up. That fight's happening in Anaheim as well. So
we're going.
So we'll be there front and center on our press duties for SureDog.com on that one. So I'm excited on that end, man. This is a great fight because not only one, does it take two guys who are kind of in a no man's land as far as the direction of their careers, and it puts them together in an exciting fight that also does not interfere with the title picture. That is a rare thing. That is a very rare thing.
And yet also does like add to the title picture. Like the winner of this fight could fight for a belt at 155. And honestly, like not at 170, but they're then behind the queue, in my opinion, especially if Anthony Pettis' name alone is attached to this, obviously because of his win against Stephen Thompson. That adds welterweight sort of credibility to this matchup in a way. If a Covington Usman fight happens, let's say August, September, November, whenever it does happen, and the winner of that fights the winner of Nate Diaz, Anthony Pettis, am I going to be upset about that? Absolutely not.
I would, but
now would I prefer that? No, but I mean, would I be upset at that? No. Who else at welterweight is there?
Santiago Ponzinibbio, but there are definitely
Ponzinibbio needs to get his profile up.
But once again, we're talking about things outside of the fight itself. So that's where things start getting murky with a name like Nate Diaz, because we do forget that, until the Conor McGregor rub came around, he was kind of a middling fighter, but he's an exciting personality. He's someone who style-wise matches up with everybody that you can think of in some sort of fan-friendly way. So in that sense, yes, I'm very happy to see Nate Diaz making his return, and Anthony Pettis is the perfect guy to make that return possible. So also too, there is some sort of feud between them that's lasted for years. Yeah. I don't quite know the origins of it, but I do know that they've had some sort of some sort of ill will toward each other for several years now. So there's that angle as well. This is a good fight for a lot of good reasons, and we can enjoy this without messing up title pictures. So once again, the sporting integrity shall remain undisturbed.
Or we can mess up title pictures because it's Nate Diaz, and I'm completely okay with that because I'm a fanboy. Fu. I know. Don't shake your head, Ant. Just join the train with me, dude. The Nate Diaz train of just watching videos of him smoking weed and like going to like Cannabis Cup and then like occasionally fighting. Like, it's awesome. And on top of that, Jay in the chat, shout out to Jay, great listener, saying Nate Diaz is the only fighter I've ever seen to apparently become a better fighter whilst not actually fighting. That's hilarious.
The myth of Nate Diaz precedes what he's actually done. I'm okay with that because it makes him more money. It keeps things interesting. It keeps things exciting. But it's good to finally see the man about to step foot in the cage. I'm just hoping because keep in mind the last time he was booked was against Dustin Poirier for UFC 230, and that fell through with a Poirier injury. Anthony Pettis is notorious for being injury prone. So please wrap Pettis up in some bubble wrap. Keep him preserved. Don't let him do anything. I don't even want him to train anymore for this fight. I want him to simply just exist in bubble wrap and be driven to the cage. And that's it.
Don't put that evil on us, Ant.
Yeah,
don't put that evil
bad
on
juju out there in the universe. Quickly, Jay in the chat saying you want to see Nate fight for a 170-pound title. Are you high, bro? Come on. Secondly, I will argue that even as a Nate Diaz fanboy, I have to admit Anthony Pettis should probably be the favorite. And Anthony Pettis against a Usman, yes, I think we obviously know who should win that fight, but I'm not going to be upset with that, especially if Anthony Pettis that knocked out Stephen Thompson, yeah, I'm okay with it. Yeah, I get that Santiago Ponzinibbio a little bit on a better standing from a meritocracy perspective, but God, Ponzinibbio I feel like he's a guy that is just stutter-stepping his entire career, and that's been hurting him. Every time he's had a big moment, he just does nothing for months afterward. Doesn't do press, is not in the limelight at all, and that hurts him.
Let's not forget that on that same card, Ben Askren versus Jorge Masvidal is taking place.
That's true. That's true. I love some fights. Phil, thoughts?
I was going to say this is in August, and I may come out and join you guys for this. I don't know. I'll have to see what I can do for that.
You have to buy a ticket, though.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I just have to see where I'm at that point, but I think it's like August 17th or something, right? So this is a ways away. But yeah, I like this fight. I'm excited to see Nate back. You know, I think, you know, the more character that you can get, you know, in the UFC, and it's going to be good. You know, Askren's brought a lot to 170 with his just incessant trash talking, and Diaz being back is good for any event, right? So, and I think you're right. Pettis probably will be the favorite, but mainly just because Diaz is coming off the loss to Connor and
a
year and a half of inactivity or something, pretty much.
Yep.
So, but you know, you can never count Diaz out, man.
That's true. That's true. And 209, motherfucker, 209. Moving on though. Chris Cyborg has her comeback fight announced against Felicia Spencer, who just submitted Megan Anderson in a high-profile fight. Anthony, you sort of made a comment earlier that like Spencer's going to get knocked out, or you made sort of like an allude. Yeah. You alluded to the fact that like Cyborg is the clear favorite in this fight.
Yes. For sure. She's definitely the clear favorite. Now I don't think that's any knock on Felicia Spencer, because while, you know, the last time we saw Cyborg, she was getting face planted by Amanda Nunes. That also was Amanda Nunes, who is arguably the greatest woman fighter of all time. So I don't think we really can knock Cyborg at all for that. And also you look at how she was able to defeat Megan Anderson, to take her down and choke her out and whatnot. Do you think she gets Cyborg down that easily? No. Do you think she's going to stand there and trade with Cyborg or employ any sort of real technical striking to best her? Because keep in mind, Cyborg has shown herself obviously able to just stand in the pocket and knock your head clean off your shoulders, but she's also shown the ability to, as she did against Holly Holm, to be able to pick her shots and fight more scientifically. So I don't really see the path to victory for Felicia Spencer unless something were to catastrophically go wrong for Cyborg.
I am curious, and this is obviously you are right. You're absolutely right. On paper, Cyborg is the clear favorite, but I am curious as to when that moment will hit where Cyborg is older, where all of a sudden she is an old fighter fighting. I don't think it's going to be this fight, but eventually there will be a day where the Felicia Spencers of the world do beat Chris Cyborg. I don't know if this is the day, but that day is rapidly approaching. And her eating that knockout in December the way she did is going to sort of make that progression even more rapid. Fu, your thoughts on Chris Cyborg having her comeback fight against Felicia Spencer, who obviously defeated one of your favorites, Megan Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, Cyborg, I would imagine this is matchmaking to kind of see what you're saying, right? If she is just an old fighter now at this point, and maybe, she's done competing at the top level, but I would imagine she wins this. I thought, not that it was a fluke against Nunes, but it seemed like she really traded with Nunes in a very stupid decision and got laid out. And I don't know why anyone would trade with Nunes is probably the hardest hitting female maybe in any sport, right? So I feel like Cyborg will win this. And I think that, it's probably just you going to use this to set up, some more big fights. And eventually, yeah, she's going to age because, the only thing that's guaranteed is Father Time is eventually going to win, right? So,
Jay in the chat saying in women's MMA, you aren't old until you're like 50. In a great callback to Gabby Garcia's rising career.
Yeah, I was just about to say, well, she'll be fighting Gabby Garcia on New Year's Eve then.
That is true. Cyborg has at least another 20 years in Japanese MMA. You are absolutely right, Jay, in the chat. Good point. God damn it. Moving on. Yoel Romero winning a massive, massive lawsuit against the supplement company, which obviously he now proved gave him tainted supplements. And one, I don't have the figure up here. I think it was like
27.45 million.
Yeah. $27 million was awarded to Yoel Romero. And I think like the next picture I saw of Romero was in Miami somewhere in front of like a nice big house with like a giant pit bull. And I'm like, yes, Romero, just live life. And he was decked out, like he had just went to the store and got some outfit. Like, it was a fly Yoel Romero that got like, he went to the store for the first time with all that cash and like he was the kid in the candy store again. I could tell. But Romero, I think, proving a great precedent going forward for fighters. Sue these supplement companies. Sue them. Because the amount of tainted supplements that are on the market at your local GNC store is absurd. So this is a clear precedent that Romero has set for UFC fighters, and also a great defense he had against USADA in his case. Like just a textbook case for a fighter to look at. Anthony, your thoughts on Romero winning this case, its potential sort of precedent ramification as a sort of legal case for fighters, and again, Romero just making the bag, man.
I hate to be the one to spoil the party here, but Romero is not getting all that money. I
Wait,
think we
wait.
can
Wait, you're
we
telling me
should hang that up. I will be very surprised
wait,
if he
Anthony,
gets anything close to $27 million from
Anthony, you
them.
telling me that the company that did not show up to the court at all in any of the court proceedings isn't actually going to pay the $27 million?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I would be very surprised if they don't file for bankruptcy or something, because they I was researching this for the Ask Ant column that I do every week. If somebody asked about this lawsuit, and I found an article from a gentleman who writes for Forbes named Brian Mazik, and he talked to some attorneys who have handled similar cases about like consumer fraud and whatnot. And they were saying like how bad of a sign it is if the company doesn't even show up to court. It's like typically that means that they're not even going to try to fight it. They're just going to file for bankruptcy. That's what that means 9 times out of 10. So if that were to happen, if that's what's going to happen next, I would expect Romero to get something maybe, but nothing near $27 million. Nothing even remotely close to that. But as far as the legal precedent that it sets, this is fantastic. This is what fighters should be doing. Now, the problem with this is, though, that to sue, you have to have resources. You have to have money. You have to have legal teams and consultants and independent testing and whatnot. Like, we think back to Josh Barnett's long disputed case with USADA that I think lasted for
2 years,
about a year and a half or something like that. And how much money he said he went out of pocket to get certain substances tested, to test all these supplements and whatnot. Not every fighter has that. Now, unless the UFC were to step in cases like this and provide legal counsel, provide the fees for testing and whatnot, this is something that, while it's great on in principle, is not something that the average guy on the UFC roster is going to be able to take advantage of.
You know what's funny is that if there was a fighter union, every fighter in the UFC could be able to do this, because they would have a legal attorney,
They would have legal representation on retainer
Yes.
for a fighters union. And also, this is something that I brought up with Jason Burgos on the trenches too. Like, if the UFC wants to curb any sort of growing talks about unionization, and we've seen them take steps to do that. We've seen them lobbying against the Ali Act. We've seen them cutting fighters like Cajun Johnson and Leslie Smith that have ties to unionization, and them swaying over other fighters like Donald Cerrone and TJ Dillashaw. They should be stepping in the role that a union would in this case. If you have a failure from USADA, that they will foot the bill for any legal representation to sue these supplement companies, to test all these products more, provide the resources that normally only the top name fighters like a Yoel Romero have access to. This would then put for the minds of the fighters be like, maybe I don't need a union because the UFC is providing something else. That would be a very cheap way for them, and cheap by the standards of a company that Dana White estimates is worth $7 billion now.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a cheap way for them to undermine talks of unionization by providing a little bit, giving a little bit more to the fighters.
I definitely agree that could be a tactic by the UFC. Fu, your thoughts on Yoel Romero winning this case and its overall ramifications?
Now, we've talked about this a lot, me and you, how just tainted drug testing is in combat sports, how it seems very inconsistent. And I think what I hope comes from this is just that the fans pause a little bit before they start calling someone, a drug cheat and all this, because obviously there are some situations here that are outside of the fighter's control, and this win should, like Ant kind of spoke to, maybe even get the UFC more involved in saying, like, we're not immediately going to jump to these conclusions. Like, we're going to support the fighter a little bit more and push for being able to take legal ramifications. And hopefully some of these companies are going to think like, shit, they just lost a $27 million lawsuit. We need to step our game up on our supplements to make sure this doesn't happen to us with these high profile sports athletes. Right. So, the big thing for me is fans. I mean, we turn on people quick. I'm guilty of it. As soon as someone pops dirty, it's like, oh man, they're a drug cheat. And a lot of times it's like, you never really know what it is, like it's like it can it obviously it can happen to any of them. Romero's a top athlete. There's a big name in the sport, and he just won a very high profile case. So I hope this brings some more, some more of a microscopic view on drug testing in general in combat sports, because it's very detrimental to the sport when top athletes get pegged as a drug cheat, and I can only imagine what it's done to him over the span of time that this has been,
And fans, I mean, don't stop having this faith in this system of drug testing right now, because the system is A, completely inept, B, completely inconsistent, and C, arguably just like the foundation of it is faulty. Like the WADA code itself is innately disputed. Paul Demio's work is probably the best to go at to sort of find academic and medical research as to why that is the case. Check him out on Twitter. I think it's like Paul Demio like 2 on Twitter. But moving on, because it's late and we're gonna try to get out here ASAP. Last couple topics. This one is mainly for Ant, because I don't watch pro wrestling. I don't really care about pro wrestling, I'll be completely honest. But this one piqued my interest because it had a MMA name that matters to all of us. George St. Pierre was apparently approached by the WWE and actually would consider a special appearance. Now, obviously, he has said like he's not going to sign a deal like Ronda Rousey did, that where he's going to be wrestling every week or something like that. That's not what he wants. But a special appearance, he did say he would love to do that. And as a pro wrestling fan, an aficionado, because I'm not that, does this pique your interest? Like, does like a George St. Pierre special appearance on like WrestleMania this year, does that interest you in any way?
Well, for the record, I'm not the biggest pro wrestling fan. I go to some indie shows. I do enjoy it, but I hardly keep up with it.
If you go to an indie show, period, one time, you're an aficionado.
If you go to PWG show with me one day, you will be hooked too. It's fantastic.
Which I'm convinced they got that name from like the porn category. So like that always throws me off.
It's PAWG.
I know. There's a missing letter there,
and I don't know what that means, by the way. So,
meanwhile, your wife's on the couch looking at you like,
I'm with Ant. Yeah. I have no idea what that means.
I just might get in trouble.
I'm a herb.
So, but I do find some interest in it. It'd be something worth watching. I mean, the WWE has been very good about having star-studded appearances in WrestleMania. So they, obviously they had Ronda Rousey. They, I remember Shaq making an appearance one time. Floyd Mayweather made an appearance. The current president of the United States made an appearance. Like they have had a wide range of celebrities and athletes from other sports show up and just make a good one-off appearance. And George St. Pierre, why not? Why wouldn't he do it? They'll probably pay him a nice chunk of change. He'll have fun. Yeah. So you go from UFC champion to Marvel Cinematic Universe villain to WrestleMania. Not a bad life, if you ask me.
Shout out to Batrick the Leaper. Legend. I just watched that movie the other day, man. God, that is such a good movie.
Best MCU movie.
It's still debatable. But digressing, Fu, are you like me, where like George St. Pierre is a name that like means something to you, and therefore when he does make his WrestleMania appearance, you are totally gonna watch that clip on Twitter or Instagram, and you'd be stoked to see it. But that's about it for your level of engagement to the product.
Yeah, I mean, the peak of my WWE or WWF kind of like hype was the Nintendo 64 games, when I loved those. You definitely, if they threw those back out somewhere, I'd play them, but I don't want to see this. I want to see George St. Pierre in the octagon again.
Really? You actually want to see him fight again? Because I'm of the mindset like I'm totally okay with George being retired, being a celebrity, doing celebrity things.
Now, I think I'm obviously way more of a casual than you guys, right?
Yeah.
So there's like big names for me. And one person that I've literally like gone back and watched, every single fight of his pretty much from start of his UFC career till the end is George St. Pierre, and so I was really hoping for the Khabib St. Pierre fight, and things like that. I wanted those fights just because I hold George to the same kind of level that I do, any top athlete in any sport. So to me, I just feel like him being in the UFC would be huge. I think this is cool for him, but it doesn't do anything for me. And I'll watch the highlights, like you said, but I'm not a big wrestling fan like that. And I think that there was a lot more that George could have done in the sport. And I hate that, just whatever happened, because I think it kind of stole his ability to really go out as, like the top guy.
What do you mean?
In the
He
sport.
went out
He's
the top
obviously
guy.
still the top in his weight class, but
Man, he came back and went champ status after what, like a 5-year layoff, and beat Michael Bisping, finished him with I think it was like a 1-2 setup, and then submitted him. God, no. I mean, George St. Pierre retired, and he's probably still arguably the best of all time.
Yeah.
And again, he's one of those guys you should know this, man. If you're young enough to retire and be on top, but still be an aged fighter where it's that perfect time, don't come back. Don't pull a Brett Favre. No one wants that. George St. Pierre retired on top, champ status. I think being a celebrity and being a Canadian icon is just the way to go. You can go on. George St. Pierre needs to start a podcast. That's what George St. Pierre needs to do. He needs to start a French-Canadian podcast and talk about aliens and shit, and he'll just make bank. Be the French-Canadian Joe Rogan of circa 2005 that didn't talk to crazy Nazis. There's a lane for that, George. You could fill out that lane.
Yeah, you're right. He did it the right way and left, but I think I would have loved to see that Khabib fight. I think everyone would have loved to see the Khabib fight, right? But I think ultimately just because there's not a lot of people that you could match up with Khabib and think, oh, he could handle Khabib. And to me, St. Pierre's one of those guys where I'm like, he could have handled Khabib, or it would have been a hell of a fight. But yeah, I just hope he comes out in a spaceship in his WWE appearance.
That'd be cool. Or some dinosaurs, because doesn't he not believe in dinosaurs? He's something with dinosaurs.
I have no clue.
He likes. I think he likes dinosaurs.
Likes dinosaurs, yes. Shout out to Santiago in the super chat. Shout out to super chats. We're monetized now, by the way. And did you hear about that?
I did hear. Congratulations.
Makes me happy, man. Kept this show on my PS4 from the start. Always fun to listen and learn some new things here and there. Keep up the quality work, guys. Thank you, Santiago. We're going to talk about a topic that we have talked about before on this channel, but we're going to sort of retread some ground and also cover it from a new angle. The UFC, or I should say the parent company of the UFC, Endeavor, William Morris Endeavor, filing papers to go public, to go an IPO. On top of that, obviously, the talk about them buying some sort of ownership of PBC in 2020 has been a brewing topic that I think could and probably will be a story of the year eventually, whether it's this year or next year. But Ant, I know you talked about this with Jason a little bit. But you talked about it from a real purely MMA angle, and my listeners didn't hear that. So I want you to sort of maybe retread some ground, unfortunately for you, but for my listeners, they haven't heard this. This whole UFC, I should say, William Morris Endeavor going public move, and on top of that, connection to them looking to buy ownership of PBC. What are the ramifications of it from an MMA perspective for the MMA landscape and industry?
I think it more so just if you imagine the same big media conglomerate owning the UFC and then owning such a huge brand in boxing, I think that just kind of merges the combat sports even more so that we've seen. And I know I've been on this show with you talking about how now these sports are becoming more and more intertwined with a lot of these overlapping broadcasting deals, like DAZN, for instance, using Matchroom to help promote Bellator, and ESPN Plus intertwining UFC and Top Rank promotion, and now PFL as well. So I think that just kind of continues down that trend. And I do remember there were some rumors about WME looking into buying Top Rank at a certain point too. So
yes,
there seems to be a commitment for WME on getting into the boxing game. And we know Dana White, while he is obviously the figurehead of the UFC and mixed martial arts for the casual fan, his first love is boxing, and that's something that he's really been adamant about. We saw him almost come to life for the Mayweather McGregor promotion, and to promote a boxing card seemed to be really exciting for him. I think this might be their version of Zuffa boxing. And we saw Dana White with that T-shirt with the Zuffa boxing logo and him saying that this was going to be a thing and they were going to get into boxing. We've seen UFC Fight Pass move into some boxing content with their broadcast deal with Roy Jones promotional company. So there is more and more synergy between these sports now, and I think that's what this represents, at least from the overall combat sports side. I think it would also be very interesting to see what Dana White's style brings to boxing, because we look back into when Dana White first got involved with the UFC as the lead of the promotion, as the person that we saw front and center. And they essentially tried to do everything that boxing wasn't in order to capture a fan base. And now we're kind of seeing those roles reverse.
Do you think there's going to be do you think there's really going to be a lot of bleed over in terms of like executive day-to-day operations with those two companies? Because from the reports of like John Nash and Kurt Emhoff, it seems like Al Heyman most likely will stay on with PBC if this sale goes through. And it seems like WME as this sort of parent company will run PBC and UFC maybe not separately and co-independently, but in effect they will, at least from the reports of it. I mean, are we really going to see Dana White on the podium at PBC press conferences? Do you think that's a high likelihood of happening?
Well, I mean, if it's run like a normal boxing press conference, why not? Everybody else gets on the mic. So I mean, for that case, yeah, I think Dana White, we see him on the podium along with
more so as
the owner of the venue and the person who's in charge of the concessions and everyone else that they invite there to say a bunch of nothing for 20 minutes. But in all seriousness, I do think that the UFC will most likely be the cash cow for WME from now forward compared to PBC. The UFC is running a gazillion events. They're generating a ton of money. They have all sorts of guaranteed money from all these different broadcast partners across the world. So there's so much guaranteed influx of cash. Then we're also talking about the pay-per-view sales, even if those have diminished somewhat, at least by the number of buys, they're still making a boatload of money from it. So that's always going to take number one, and number one gets to say what happens at number two. And with the heavy knowledge and experience that Dana brings from just fight promotion, and then too from the world of boxing from his time there, I do think he gets involved with PBC. And yes, Al Heyman will be running things if those reports are true. But I think for sure Dana White's going to have a say in what goes and what doesn't. Guaranteed, if there's a big fight that they're trying to put together and they're having trouble negotiating it, you think Dana White won't get that call to sit down on those meetings and make that happen?
I don't think he will. Why? Look, if PBC is having an issue making Leo Santa Cruz, Gary Russell, Dana White getting on the call with them doesn't do anything.
It's another voice. It's another powerful voice.
It's a voice that they don't know and don't care about. That's not PBC. On top of
they'll
that,
care because he's involved with their checks being written.
But he isn't. WME is. That's very different.
He is the guy. He's the guy in charge of their $4.5 billion property.
No, it's Ant. Come on. I think you are propagating a Dana White myth that is just. I'm not propagating. Dana White does not have the level. Let me speak. Dana White does not have the level of control that people speak of ever. He never has had that level of control. Before WME, it was the Fertitta brothers. So he's never been the owner of the UFC. He's always been set up to be the guy that's running the show. I don't think he's that. I don't think he clearly is not that. Secondly, we've seen multi-billion-dollar companies run subsidiaries independently, a la Disney with Star Wars and Marvel. Those are two subsidiaries within Disney, and they're run co-independently. There's no Kevin Feige that's going back and forth in those universes and running shows, even though, like you say, Ant, number one is number one. Marvel Universe is number one. Kevin Feige is number one. They haven't brought him in to replace Kathleen Kennedy and run Star Wars. I think it's going to be similar with WME, with PBC and UFC. They're going to be two independent companies. Networks might merge eventually, but not in any time soon because network deals are set for the next 3 or 4 years. I think bringing Dana White in to run anything other than being just a loud spokesperson to get behind the podium for a picture op is pointless and actually does probably a disservice to making fights, knowing boxers. Boxers don't want to hear from people that aren't their people, aren't really involved in the process, trying to negotiate the fight on somebody else's behalf. I just think a Dana White putting himself in the situation in PBC negotiations is a bad thing. It actually will do worse things for boxing.
Well, and the other thing I think that from a boxing perspective is putting a guy who's in charge of what is largely considered, even in terms of boxing, to me, MMA has, in UFC in particular, has more of a stigma of like kind of the, like Bob Arum said, the white skinhead kind of thing, right? You can't really take Dana White and put him in charge of what is probably the most pro-black promotion in boxing with PBC. I don't know that would work.
Dana White, who was at the Republican National Convention supporting Trump, going out there and trying to promote Deontay Wilder, Keith Thurman, Earl Spence. Like, the optics of it are going to be really odd if that happens. I think
the optics are already odd in the UFC. I mean, he's also trying to make headway in Mexico with particular fighters, and he's a Trump guy. He's obviously, they're putting on an event in the Muslim heavy Abu Dhabi, and he's a Trump guy. So there's always been this contradiction. The UFC was just this last event promoting their Pride Month shirts and all this profits go to support LGBTQ charities and whatnot. Yet they're doing business with Ramzan Kadyrov. So there are always these contradictions. There's always something that doesn't appear right. I mean, boxing, while it might have, and yes, PBC is definitely the most pro-black of a lot of these promotions, but boxing in itself has inherently been such a racist sport from jump. So
Absolutely.
we're talking about things that already exist that we know that things still get done in spite of.
We're talking about a sport that intentionally tried to big up a white guy to take down a black heavyweight at a time when
Yeah.
the world did not want to see a black heavyweight champion, So yeah, definitely boxing is largely racist too. It just
let me
public perception. UFC has that stigma with it.
Let me jump in here because I think Ant probably has a good point. Like, largely that's going to get sort of brushed under the rug in a way because, like Ant says, the UFC has been dealing with these PR issues and nightmares for years now, and they just don't care and they just keep moving, right? And like they don't seem to pay attention to any of the criticism. They don't seem to really acknowledge the criticism, like especially the Kadyrov criticism that's been out there for years now. They just don't acknowledge it. They move on, act like it doesn't exist. I think that would happen in this similar case. However, bring it less about public perception and more about the individual fighters and boxers within PBC. Because PBC is run very differently than not only boxing promotions, but UFC. These fighters aren't held down to any promotional contracts. So you're talking to truly independent contractors with true autonomy with their negotiations, their sort of decision making. I just think I think WME will be wise to let Heyman run ship still because A, the fighters trust Heyman. B, it seems like PBC is running a well-oiled machine at this point in time. And C, fighter trust, especially fighters that have complete autonomy with their contracts, promotional contracts, network contracts. Yeah, you want to make them happy. Because at any point, guys like Gary Russell, who talked about leaving, they could leave. And if Dana White's calling them up and they don't like that, they're going to leave. They have no incentive. They're not tied down to anything. Unlike a UFC fighter or even top-ranked fighters or matchroom fighters that actually have promotional deals that are tied down for 3, 4, 5, 6 fights. These guys aren't. And I am curious to see the blending of worlds, as Ant says, because that does seem to be happening more and more as time goes on. It seems like that Mayweather-McGregor fight was a catalyst to these two worlds and cultures combining and meshing in ways that we haven't seen. I just don't think we're going to see as overt combining of worlds as Dana White being in charge of PBC. That seems like a Dana White fantasy that just does not seem like reality.
No, see, I'm not saying that would be a successful endeavor. I'm not saying that at all, but I do think he'll have some influence on what goes on because, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't PBC kind of conceived as an answer to the UFC from a boxing standpoint to publicize the brand over the individual fighters and trying to structure the TV deals in a similar way? Am I correct in that?
Yes, but I think that point, it doesn't cancel out the fact that the actual contract sort of structure of PBC is vastly different than UFC. Even though their branding has been in a way to sort of imitate UFC branding and promoting, the actual structure of the company is vastly different.
Well, and I think another thing that could be a factor here is just, I mean, there's been rumors that there's financial issues on one side, right? So on the PBC side, and some of kind of the talking heads on the media side saying that, the numbers that are being done and these new TV contracts aren't close to what they need to be to sustain like the money that they've been given, right? So that might play some into it if they're, it could be forced that Dana or somebody that's picked by the companies put, up as like a figurehead. So I don't really know like what that would be, in terms of that. I don't see
But Food,
I don't see Dana being the top guy.
But Food, do you think that idea that PBC is hurting for cash is as accurate as it was maybe a year or two ago?
I don't know. I think
doesn't
that
seem
there
like
is
it.
such an, and I don't mean this in any way to slight fighters because they deserve every penny they get, but I think that the boxing payouts have gotten so crazy that I could see them looking long term and saying, "There's no way we can sustain this."
Yeah, but
You know.
yeah, but that's a industry-wide issue. That's not a PBC issue.
Yes, absolutely, industry-wide issue,
And that's
for
why
sure.
that point doesn't, to me, equal PBC is in trouble. Because then that point would add, well, then DAZN's in trouble, Matchroom's in trouble, Top Rank's in trouble, ESPN's in
Yeah.
trouble. Because they're paying out everyone too much. And it's clear their return on investment probably isn't there. Especially like ESPN's numbers this year have been trash. They haven't hit 1 million viewers for a single boxing telecast this entire year. That's troubling. The Crawford pay-per-view was not a success.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, PBC numbers have been successful, especially on Fox. On top of that, their pay-per-views have been successful.
Yeah,
whether we
but
like them or not.
successful to us is different than successful to the industry and to Fox in general for the time slot they're given and things like that. I mean, when you look at people like Evan from Fistianados, who said basically that they're one of the lowest rated time slots in all of Fox programming. Now, I get that you're putting them up against like The Simpsons or something crazy like that and saying they're very low rated for that, but there's a lot of money that's being put into that, and if the ratings aren't what they want, that's all I'm saying. And I don't think they're in financial trouble as much as I think if you're going to stay ahead of the game, you have to be thinking long term. And if you're thinking long term, you're thinking there's no way a lot of these promotional outfits are going to be able to sustain the money that these boxers are wanting for these
Well,
fights.
then again, let's talk about the problems and solutions in more of a macro way when we talk about these promotions and networks, because a lot of people isolate it to PBC, and it's not accurate, because that issue that we are talking about, that you are addressing, is accurate, is an issue, but it's one that is clearly industry wide. DAZN is lucky that they are making money in other markets. But there's no way long term you can make an argument that they are being successful right now in the U.S. market. There's no way you can make that argument.
No, they're for sure pulling like other brands and other companies have done, where they are successful in one place or in multiple places, and they're using that as a way to take that loss somewhere else. You know, Sony did it for a long time with the PlayStation. They took a huge loss on PlayStation, but they made it up with their TVs, with the Sony Bravias and things like that. It's one of the number one TVs. So that's how DAZN is recovering from the loss that they're taking in the US. But even then, you can see Eddie Hearn is very forthcoming that he doesn't think long term that this is going to last. He's told fighters multiple times, cash in while you can, because there's no way this money is going to keep coming. It's ridiculous, you know? I mean, he is point blank said that. And I think Al Heyman's a smart businessman. They in their mind, they got to think, if there's a way to cash out and to get a big infusion of cash, and to look further down the road at how the game is going to change for a lot of these fighters, like, he's going to make those smart moves. And I just feel like this is an issue that boxing is really going to face in 2 to 3 years, where there's no way they can sustain the amount of money that they're paying people.
So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see when the crossroads hit in boxing, when these promoters and networks maybe can't pay the fighters what they've become accustomed to. But guys, that's going to be it for today. Anthony, obviously, thank you for joining us today on a late night show. Always appreciate it. Let people know where they can find you and where they can find your work.
Always an honor and a privilege to jump on MCR with you guys. But you can find me on Twitter at AntWalkerMMA. You can find my work on Sherdog.com and MMA on Point. Check out that YouTube channel as well. Oh, and the Walkout Network, my own channel.
Yes. Walkout Network and Sherdog YouTube channel you can find on our affiliates and friends of the show playlist. Fu, where can people find you?
Fugatti MCR, all platforms. yeah, it was great to be here with you guys tonight. And obviously, you know, my knowledge pales in comparison. Thank you guys for entertaining me.
Yeah, you got to talk about boxing there in the last 5 minutes, Phil. You really came out of your shell there. You can tell, right, Ant? Like, boxing. He perked up a little bit. He was like,
yeah. Notice how quiet I got.
But anyways, guys, hit the like button, share the show, subscribe, head over to patreon.com/Mixed Combat Radio. That is still our #1 source of income for our channel. So head over there. Yes, the channel just did get monetized, but we only made like 10 cents the other day. So that's not enough to afford to send Fu out to Houston to catch the Ramirez Hooker fight, or Rob down to London to catch the White Rivas fight. So head over to patreon.com/Mixed Combat Radio. $1 a month gets you extra shows every week. We should be back live this Friday for a Trending Now edition. Going to be talking about Godzilla, Pikachu, a ton of movies that came out, a ton of music. The Jim Jones album that came out, album of the year, hands down, At Me, I Want the Smoke. But yes, a lot to get to and talk about on that episode. But we'll be back tomorrow for a free boxing show with Rob, 2 p.m. Pacific, usual time. Have a great one. Find me, Mount Hunter, MCR, all platforms. Peace.
Are you off your tits? Have you been smoking something?
Stay